So I'm Ryan Parks, I'm the CEO of JamFactory, and for those who don't know, welcome to our Wednesday lunchtime talk. Let me start by acknowledging that we're here on the land of the Kerryn people and pay my respects to elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that this land was never sealed. Let me also thank the University of South Australia for our ongoing partnership in so many ways, in so many layers, but importantly today, with the use of this fabulous space, which makes for a lovely and casual, relaxed atmosphere for our Wednesday talks. It's great to see a bunch of faces who I don't know in the crowd. That's one of the great things about being able to hear. Our special speaker today is Kerryn Levy. Kerryn is an alumnus from this institution, as well as from the JamFactory, which is rather lovely. And currently has a solo show in space at JamFactory. I'm not going to say any more than that because we just want to hear you. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. My name is Kerryn Levy. I'm a ceramic artist. I'm going to talk a little bit about where I come from and my practice, a little bit about the mentors that I've had and the experiences that have led to where I am in my practice today. And I've also included a little bit just about about the business side of my practice and how I make a living. Thank you. From my arts practice as well. So I was born in Israel in '92 and moved to Ireland when I was 6. And then to Australia when I was 13. So I have been in Australia for most of my life now. And I started my ceramics journey here at UniSA. I had some very incredible lecturers and teachers while I was here at uni, in particular Joe Crawford, Lisa Ferrin and Julie Bartholomew. And I can quite specifically see kind of where the different aspects of my practice kind of come from in each of these incredible artists. So Lisa and Joe in particular helped me form that kind of initial training and throwing. And then Julie Bartholomew was my lecturer in my 3rd year and really encouraged me to delve further into the conceptual side of my practice. Which was so this is the kind of work that I was making at uni, so quite functional ware, quite similar palette to where I am today, that kind of neutral palette, quite simple porcelain throneware. And then in my 3rd year I was making more sculptural work, and you can see Julie's kind of influence there as well. So then after my uni degree, I went overseas to Canada and South America and travelled for a couple of years. I wasn't really sure where I wanted to go with my career. And so I took a little bit of a break and did some beautiful, beautiful multi-day hikes through Canada and South America and really immersed myself in the natural landscape there. And then over a couple of summers on Vancouver Island, I joined a couple of local studios, and started making ceramics again, and realised that I did in fact want to pursue ceramics as a career. And so at that point, I applied for the JamFactory and was very fortunate to be successful in that application to the associate program. And so this was my first studio space at JamFactory that I shared with Connie Augustinos, who's another ceramics artist. And sharing my space with Connie was actually a really influential experience, because she hand builds, is a really beautiful hand builder. And at the time I was just quite focused on throwing. I was in love with the wheel, but I was also becoming a little bit tired of the symmetry of throneware, and so I tried my hand at hand building and found that I really, really loved it, and started doing a little bit more in that direction. But while I was at I had Damon Moon and David Pedler, who were the head of the ceramics department and the production manager at JamFactory. And so just the incredible wealth of knowledge from them while I was there was just amazing to have access to their experiences, to also to watch their own experiments while they were working on their practice, and just be able to ask them questions and get kind of critical feedback from them on a daily basis was just invaluable completely. And the skills that I gained while I was there, so much of the kind of business side of production wear and applying thousands of decals and learning production glazing and mixing up giant vats of glaze and learning how to pack the work, learning how to negotiate orders, pricing, and then also just having the space and the time to experiment and try out different kind of aesthetics, different mediums, and of course all the other people that are at JamFactory that I could just kind of bounce ideas off of. So this is where I kind of started off, I suppose, with that throneware, the production, lots of restaurant orders, and then I started into the hand building and kind of started. They got a bit wobblier, a little bit wobblier, bit by bit. And I can recall the exact exhibition where things kind of really turned into the wobbly asymmetry vessels, which I kind of create now. So in 2017, the Ceramics Associates, we all put on a couple of shows for Sala. One of them was called Pretty Useful and the other was called Pretty Useless. And so we kind of challenged ourselves to create a body of work that was beautiful and functional, and then of course a body of work that was beautiful but didn't have to be functional. And that was kind of my unleashing. I think just the permission to make work that wasn't functional, just like kind of flicked a switch, and I just started to make really kind of sculptural vessels from there. I was doing a lot of camping. I was cycling through the parklands to get to the Jam every day and just kind of taking photos of the natural landscape, eucalyptus trees, the textures, the colours. These are from the Flinders Ranges, and so you can see kind of where that inspiration comes from in the colour and textures that I use. And they just kind of got bigger and wobblier. And I started to really enjoy photographing them as groups and series and playing a little bit with how their pieces kind of worked together, interacted. I started making pairs and groupings specifically to be shown together. And so my process usually involved making the first piece, which was often informed by lines that I had kind of traced from the shape of a human body in motion, or various different trees or birds, and I would kind of just find a really interesting line and just kind of create that silhouette for the first piece. And then the second piece would be informed by the shape of the first piece. And so quite often the second piece would be the more interesting one because it was not something that I imagined. It was, defined by the shape of another object. So I do think putting in place those kind of boundaries and rules almost kind of helped to create something more interesting. And I still get requests for these shapes, specifically these days as well. And so I started to really try different methods of making. I was kind of slab building mostly. These are all coil built from a flat base. But I kind of got to a point where I would build and then I would cut kind of a limb off and then turn it around and see how it looked in another position. And that was how I was able to create some really interesting shapes that I wouldn't have thought of just if I had kind of sketched an idea out first. Another kind of influential artist that was in my orbit at the time was Jerry Wedd. He had the Icon show on at Jam, which was a traveling exhibition. And so myself and a few of the other ceramics artists at the time were given the opportunity to accompany Jerry on some of his regional arts kind of workshops and tours and talks that he would do. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to accompany him on a few of those, and just got some really amazing kind of informal lessons along the way. And he was the one who actually taught me on a flight somewhere how to kintsugi. And that's become quite a crucial aspect of my practice now as well. So I'm very grateful to Jerry for that. In 2018, JamFactory funded and the Medici Collective funded a trip to attend a residency in Japan. This was a Shiraoni studio about an hour or so northwest of Tokyo, in a beautiful town called Onishi. So I got to spend 5 weeks in this town, living with, I think it was about 9 or 10 other artists who all worked in different mediums. And we just spent our days exploring the gorgeous landscape around us. This was in the middle of summer, so it was quite hot. We would swim in the rivers. We would participate in a bunch of different local workshops. So tea ceremony, ikebana, calligraphy, and the ikebana and calligraphy workshops in particular had quite an influence on how my work developed from there. So I'll show you kind of a little bit later the influence of the calligraphy, but the ikebana, just seeing how a single stem could be sculptural in itself, and thinking about how the vessel holds that stem and how the stem kind of travels through the vessel to create a sculpture all together. This was from an indigo workshop as well, which was really beautiful. So this was my little space at the residency, and a little outdoor kiln. Shiraoni also does a specific ceramics kind of section of their residencies, which goes over winter, and the participants there are all ceramic artists, so it's not a mixed medium, it's all just specifically ceramics, and then they get to fire the Anagama kiln up in the mountains, which one of my other fellow associates did, Hannah. But I actually really enjoyed having the access to the other people there who were from different kind of backgrounds and mediums, because I often think that when you're surrounded by people who are just working within your own practice, there's kind of a bit of a ceiling within, everyone kind of knows the rules and knows the limits of the medium, whereas when you start to chat and kind of bounce ideas off of people from different departments and different mediums, they see things from a different angle, which can often expand the work that you're doing. So I found that really beneficial. I started kind of collecting rocks and crushing them up and rolling them into the clay that I used, which created this really beautiful texture, and kind of the little bits of iron sort of started melting through the glaze. And I really liked that idea of having the physical kind of location within the pieces that I was making. And so this is also where I started to rip the tops off of my pieces, and you can see that kind of example of the calligraphy and this beautiful texture that I was inspired by. And so that's been kind of a design choice that I make for almost all of my work now still. And this is where I started what I call the Onishi vessels, named after the town that the residency was in, and that's a new vessel with that kind of space in the middle of it for the stem to come through, or for the flower to be shown in a particular way. So that's an example of some of the pieces that I made there. And that's a kind of whole body of work. And then another kind of influential experience that I had at JamFactory was a workshop that we did with Louise. And one particular kind of activity that we did that he had us do was to write up an artist bio, which seems very simple, but we were challenged to really just distill our practice into a few key sentences. And this is something that I kind of, once I really workshopped it and honed down and figured out, okay, so my practice is, generally inspired by the natural landscape, by the desire to connect with people and place, the desire to have, visually the maker's mark within the work. And so whenever I'm doing an exhibition or making a body of work, I always refer back to that kind of manifesto almost, or an artist statement, or a bio. And so that was quite an invaluable experience. And that's not to say that it's stuck there. I can't change that. I often kind of tweak it and think whether that still kind of rings true for my practice. But it is nice just to have that. I think it's helped me kind of maintain a really balanced practice, and kind of maintains integrity as well. At this time, I also started to catalogue my work, so I've been stamping the year and the vessel number onto the bottom of every piece that I make. That's kind of a one-off sculptural vessel. And so when I kind of finished the associateship, I was set up in a really good place. I had a strong aesthetic identity. I had this kind of artist statement that I could refer back to. I had teaching experience. I had developed relationship with stockists. I had exhibited, developed an online presence. I had figured out my accounting and my invoicing. And I also developed something that is really important, I think, for the business of my practice, which was developing an intro folder for new customers, which included my bio, my images, my price list. And I use that exact same folder. I send that out to every new client or customer that inquires about my work or that wants to work with me. And it's just like a great little kind of nugget to have under my belt, and it just makes that kind of admin side of things just a lot smoother for me. And then I went across the hallway to Studio 8 with Connie. So that was in 2019, which was a pretty big year for me. I went to Guildhouse had this amazing residency set up for various artists, and I was selected to be one of them. And I basically got to ride the gun all the way up to Darwin, and I had all my clay with me and my table and tools, and I set up along the way and did demos and workshops for the gun passengers. So that was and then at the end of it, every artist that did this experience made work as a reflection of that experience, and then was exhibited at the railway station. And so that was a really beautiful time, just being in Central Australia and making work that really kind of reflected that landscape. And I was also fortunate enough to have some work collected. So I showed at the Shepparton Art Museum, and this pair called Regeneration was collected. So it's now in their permanent collection, which is very exciting. And this is some of the other work that I showed for that. So this pair, sorry, that photo on the left isn't particularly great quality, but this is a pair that I kind of started to explore this shape where two pieces entwine and neither piece stands on its own, so it needs the other in order to be able to stand. And so it's quite a tricky process, because I had to then prop them up in the kilns to fire and glaze, and then of course ceramics does tend to shrink and warp a little bit in the firings, and so getting them back together again afterwards was quite an experience. But I really loved kind of exploring this more three-dimensional shape, and I've developed that over the years a little bit. So there's quite a bit of kintsugi work in that exhibition as well. And then at the end of 2019, I think it must have been, I had some work in an exhibition for Modern Times, and every Christmas they have an exhibition that's themed, and so this year's theme was modern rituals. And so I developed a collection of candle holders and candelabras. So I already had the menorah, which is this one on the right, made for myself, which I used for Hanukkah, for lighting the Hanukkah candles. And so I just continued that those designs for the other parts of the collection. And then this range has become basically my bread and butter for my practice. These are objects that I sell on a wholesale to my stockists, and they make up quite a large portion of my income now. So it's kind of amazing what comes from these, little exhibitions that you might not think can amount to much. In 2020, I also had the great fortune of receiving quite a large order, also through JamFactory, for the Sky City EOS Hotel. So I made hundreds of vases and vessels for their rooms. And at the time, just before that, I kind of had a little stint in the curatorial department and a little stint in the admin department. I was also working in hospitality and kind of selling my work through stockists and exhibitions. And so I kind of got, through the curatorial department and the admin department, I kind of got a really interesting look at the back of house of how, everything functions behind the scenes. So not just as an artist making, but also what goes into the accounting, the kind of admin involved with curating shows and putting shows together. I learned how to pack work really well and catalogue work really well. And so all these things kind of came together to inform my practice and the way that I run the business side of things as well. And so after this big order, and also having now that wholesale, the candle holders that were doing really well, I was able to quit all those other jobs and just focus entirely on ceramics as my entire source of income, which included teaching and all those different sources as well. But I was now just relying on my arts practice, which was a pretty amazing thing that I never thought I'd be able to do. And I was able to invest at this point in the kiln as well, because I was getting ready to move out of the JamFactory. And this is 2020, of course, so COVID hit. And I was supposed to show some work at Sydney Contemporary with the gallery that I work with there called Curatorial & Co. And so I had applied for a grant, one of the COVID grants, to help me with this exhibition. And then that was cancelled for COVID. So I used some of those funds instead to buy a second kiln. And also invest in slab roller, which I had found really helped me with those big orders of kind of the big production kind of work as well. So I was starting to really set myself up to move out on my own. But this is the work that I was going to show at Sydney Contemporary, which I did end up showing in Sydney just through the gallery, which was really nice that they didn't kind of go to waste. And then in 2021, I moved into a studio at Mixed Goods, which is run by Dean Topher and Andrew Carvolth. And so these are my beautiful brand new kilns that I was very proud of. And I don't have a picture. I couldn't find one of the actual workspace. But my beautiful partner, Luca, he also had a space there kind of across the way. So that was a really nice kind of jump out of Jam, but not too far. And so Dean and Andrew put on a show at Melbourne Design Week that year and asked me to be a part of it. And the theme after WOMAD, still in the weekend, after COVID, the theme was kind of to create something wonderful. I think it was called Wonderstruck, actually. So create something kind of bright and colourful and magical and wonderful. And I had been really interested in Matisse and his cutouts for quite a while, and it was kind of just in the back of my mind. And I had also just started experimenting with some wall sculptures. And so I took the opportunity to create some work inspired by Matisse's cutouts. So that middle picture just shows how the backing is made to hang. And so basically I was just drawing two-dimensionally with the clay onto a bat and then building it up from there to create that three-dimensional aspect. And then the pieces at the bottom were based on Matisse's blue ladies. And then I became pregnant and Luke and I wanted to buy a house. And so the focus that year really became to make money. I kind of try to set myself little goals for my practice every year. So, the year before that had a lot of output. I was setting up my space, buying kilns, buying furniture. That was kind of the idea for that year. And the year before that had been, to set up stockists and different production. And then, this year became stop spending and make some money. So I wanted to include a little bit about where my different sources of income come from. So quite a large portion of my income comes from wholesale to stockists, so about 50%, sometimes even 60%. Consignment sales of larger work, I don't really work on consignment too much anymore, so that doesn't fill up too much. But then website sales and private commissions kind of together with that, about 25%. Exhibition sales, the sales from exhibitions don't make up a huge part of my income, but exhibitions are kind of the catalyst to a lot of the new designs that come through and then filter into my kind of wholesale work. So they're just crucial. And also just to have the opportunity to create something different. Teaching, 15% usually when I run classes, and kiln hiring. So I do hire out my kilns, which helps cover the costs of my own firings, and often on a good month will also cover the rent of the space that the kilns take up. So that's just an example of some of the kind of wholesale work and a little class that I had for luster outside. So I was just running term classes mostly. So it was kind of 8-week blocks, which would kind of connect me with the community, and also it would usually cover the rent that I was paying for my studio space. And then this is kind of an interesting little commission that I got just before I went on maternity leave. I worked with a local designer, so this is the sign for the restaurant Botanic, and he kind of gave me an idea of what he wanted the background to look like. So this is basically just a big slab. And then he sent it off to be engraved, which I would never have thought of as a ceramic artist. So it's just another example of how working alongside other industries can really kind of expand the range of work that you can do. So that was a cool little project. And then I had my beautiful son, Zev, and went on leave from ceramics for a few months. But not for too long. So about 5 months after Zev was born, I got this mammoth commission through Fontainebleau. They are a development company in the US, and they wanted kind of life-size sculptures essentially. And so I came up with a design alongside my partner Luca, who's a furniture maker. And so again, I would probably not have thought to do it this way, but bouncing those ideas off of him, and he kind of helped me come up with this kind of sleeve method of combining two pieces together to create the height that I needed, because there was no way practically that I could make and move this as a single piece. They wanted it to be about 4, 5, and 6 foot tall pieces. So those are the prototypes that I made just to figure out how they go together. So if that makes sense, the piece for example, on the very far right slots into the one next to it on top. And some colour samples. So I hired a space at Jam, back here again, and so that I had access to the giant kiln that's available in the ceramic studio, Big Bernard. And so, this is just some of the process of making. Oddly, or maybe not so oddly, but the making process itself was actually the easiest part. It was what came after. It was firing and moving and packing and all of those parts that actually were the hardest part. I really enjoyed this making part of it. And that's a hilarious photo of how I propped up some of those pieces while they were drying. So Luca, again, my savior, came up with this idea to make sure that the tops fit into the bottoms because ceramics as it dries shrinks, and it was also just too big to be kind of lifting one piece into the other to check that they fit. So we took the measurements of the top of the bottom pieces, and then he created this kind of jig for me, and I built into that and then had the line kind of marked out of where I needed to go. So that was how I came around those kind of challenges. They were sprayed with slip. I didn't want to use glaze because too many variables. I wasn't sure exactly how the firing would go and how kind of high I could fire in the kiln, so I kept it simple with slip. So that was the photo on the left is what the company sent me that they wanted. So I kind of adjusted the design slightly to allow for the larger scale. And those were the tests for the different slip colours. Firing in the big trolley kiln. Zev made a big appearance during this time because I couldn't always find someone to look after him. And the packing. So it was a pretty huge effort, pretty big job. And Lucas still had to, so they didn't quite fit together again afterwards. So we still had to do a bit of grinding and definitely learned a lot from this commission and how to do it better next time even. So that's them finished. Pretty big. And so we're building a shed at the moment to be our studio so that we can work from home. It's a big kind of 98 square metre shed, which we'll put a big dividing wall down the middle, and you'll have one half and I'll have the other half. And then this is another little thing that I've been working on at the beginning of this year, the Adelaide Parklands Art Prize. So I just thought I'd include that because I've been lucky to be shortlisted. So, and I've kind of, I was, since that first kind of wall sculpture play that I did for Dean and Andrew's show, I've been kind of really interested in doing it on a larger scale and combining lots of different pieces to create more of an installation. So I just got a map of the Adelaide Parklands and started to kind of draw out little shapes throughout that space and then created them and put them together. So that will be showing at the Festival Centre from the 25th of this month, I believe. And that brings me to the exhibition that I have on and the Collect Space at the moment. So Mary Oliver is an American author who I have kind of referenced throughout the last few years. She's one of my favourite authors. So this is a passage from Upstream, which is one of her books of essays. Teach the children. We don't matter so much, but the children do. Show them daisies and the pale hepatica. Teach them the taste of sassafras and wintergreen, the lives of the blue sailors, mallow, sunburst, moccasin flowers, and the frisky ones, inkberry, lamb's quarters, and blueberries, and the aromatic ones, rosemary, oregano. Give them peppermint to put in their pockets as they go to school. Give them the fields and the woods and the possibility of the world salvaged from the lords of profit. Stand them in the stream, head them upstream. Rejoice as they learn to love this green space they live in, its sticks and leaves, and then the silent, beautiful blossoms. Attention is the beginning of devotion. So this is what I based that body of work on. And I think it's kind of just what my whole practice is based on, really, what you can get from that beautiful little passage. So when I make a body of work for an exhibition, I usually just start by making the various shapes and have kind of a vague idea of how I want them to kind of come together. And then I make a whole bunch of glaze tests and figure out the kind of colour scheme that I want. I also did want for this one to walk through my little town of Strathalbyn and kind of on my walks with Seb and pick up little bits from around the landscape like I did in Onishi and kind of crush them up and fold them into the clay, but I didn't quite get there, so maybe the next one. But this is kind of the colour palette that I ended up going with. And it was the first time that I tried covering entire pieces in luster, so that was a pretty cool experience. So this is the dance. Sun-kissed. This piece actually originally wasn't supposed to have gold on it, but it came out of the firing and it had pinholes all over the glaze. And so I was like, okay, maybe I'll try and refire it, but it's always risky, and especially with this kind of shape, I was worried it might slump. And my friend Ashley, who's also a ceramicist, was with me at the time, and she was like, oh, why don't you just kintsugi all the little pinholes? And so I was like, oh yeah, actually that's a good idea, I'll do that. And it was a really nice meditative practice actually, because every time Seb was having a nap, I would go into the studio and just add a few more dots of gold, and yeah, in the end it became this beautiful kind of freckled, gold speckled piece that I really love. Which has happened quite a lot actually. Happy accidents become something I try to recreate down the line. Centerpiece candelabra. So this piece has this beautiful manganese heavy glaze in it that kind of waterfalls down the sides, down the walls, and looks kind of like glitter almost in the sun. And same with this one, Wildfire. So you can see how that calligraphy workshop all those years ago have really come into play here, and that texture of just kind of pulling that clay apart. Pride vessel and prayer vessel and sentinel. So that sentinel vessel actually I've had in my studio for a couple of years, and I'll often keep aside pieces that I make that I think are special and kind of hold them aside for the right exhibition. And so this one seemed right. And I think I was probably going to glaze it white originally, but I left it unglazed for years and then ended up glazing it white for this one. But it's nice to have those pieces kind of set aside, ready to go. And same with these ones actually. I don't usually title my work, but for this one, they all just seemed really obvious to me, how they fit together. Winter, inspired by this beautiful tree in the centre of Strathalbyn that just looks like it's perpetually in the middle of winter, even on this beautiful sunny summer's day. It's just bare of leaves. I don't know, it might be dead, but it just is like that, and it's so cool. I love the shapes, that kind of V, and the really bare look of it. So that's what inspired Winter. Harp vessel. This is a shape that I started kind of playing around with last year and have really enjoyed kind of making different iterations of. And Strawberry Moon. So I made this late last year, and I wrote kind of a little reflection as I layer coil upon coil in the building of this sculpture and use my fingers to slowly smooth and shape the clay. I reflect on the thing that has consumed me so completely this year, motherhood. A constant tangle of limbs, a crisscross of scars, the ultimate dichotomy of tension and relaxation. The time I have in the studio for the meditation that is creative work is now sparse and more treasured than ever. As I build this piece, it twists and turns around itself, simultaneously entangled and unwinding, sharp and soft, fleshy and freckled, raw and golden. And finally, Night Sky from Matisse. So again, kind of working on that original Wonderstruck idea of the Matisse-inspired wall pieces, and had a really fun time creating an installation out of it. And it was nice to just see it all come together like this, and I definitely would like to do a bit more work in this kind of stream. And that's it. Thank you so much.